I was on an alien game show and it scarred me for life. Hello everyone, I wanted to start off this post by saying that aliens are indeed real. Many people won't believe me or my story, but I know the truth. I'm telling all of you this story because I feel guilty for what I had done that night. And I also want to warn you about the atrocities that are going on all around the world. I'm a single, 29-year-old man living in Willow Creek, Oregon in a small home that I can barely afford. I usually work long hours to make ends meet at a job that I hate. My friend and love life is practically non-existent and I really have no clue what I'm doing with my life. I truly have no purpose. I don't have any siblings, and I'm not particularly close with my parents anymore ever since they kicked me out of the house, leaving me homeless for a few months. You're probably wondering why I'm telling you all of this and why my life sucks. I'm doing this because I believe that is why they chose me. And by that I mean the Hollywood little green men, although this time they were real. I was settling down for the night like I have done countless Sunday nights before. I grabbed an ice-cold beer, sat on my couch and put on the football game, American football that is. I was particularly interested in this game because I had placed a bet that the Seahawks would beat the Cardinals. I really shouldn't have been betting with money I really didn't have, but I digress. Anyways, the game was about 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter when I began to hear the neighbors' dogs barking like mad, rabid wolves. Not only that, but the wind also began to slowly pick up a little bit. Normally, my little part of town was quiet around this time with not much commotion, so I did think it was a little odd that such events were happening. I decided to step up from my dirty, beer-soaked couch and stretch out my legs on the front porch to my house, curious about the unusual nature of the atmosphere around it. I noticed something almost immediately when stepping outside. All the homes in my little neighborhood were void of light. Their homes were sat with no lights on. I also noticed that the street lamps were also turned off. This was an odd scene because it was already dark outside. Why would no one have their lights on? Was there an issue with the grid? While pondering these thoughts, I noticed another strange thing. The sound from my TV was off. I turned around to find that my home was also void of light. My kitchen, living room, and TV lights were all turned off without me knowing. I began to feel an instinct of worry but knew that this issue would most likely resolve itself in the morning. Plus, I had an early shift tomorrow, so I thought that I should get some well-needed rest. I headed to my room, laid down on my mattress, and fell asleep. I woke up, only to find myself in a dark scene, cold metal pressed against my body, an awful smell that made its way into my nose, and a woman crying to my right. She looked to be young, about the same age as me, maybe a little bit younger. I also noticed that I had heavy metal chains wrapped across my hands and around my neck. My vision was blurry, and I couldn't see much. I began to panic, thinking I was dreaming until the woman, in a somber voice, said to me, "Thank God, you're awake. I thought they killed you too." I was confused, more than anything now, but thankfully my vision was beginning to improve as my eyes adjusted to the darkness. The room we were in was about 15 feet long and about 15 feet wide. It was made up of a dark purple metal that I did not recognize. There was an almost dim light in this room, but I found no source for where it could have originated. I also noticed that there were no doors or windows, seemingly no entryway or exit. I finally noticed another person in this room to my left. It was a man with pale blue skin, who seemed to be unconscious. The women spoke again. "Are you okay? Do you know what's happening? Did you see them?" I noticed that she was chained up in the way I was, but the man to my left wasn't. I spoke to the woman. "What's going on here? Where am I?" She looked disappointed in my response, probably expecting me to give her an answer to what I had asked her. She said, "Damn it. Damn it. Why is this happening to us? Why are they doing this to us?" I was still confused, hoping for some kind of answer when I asked her. "Please, tell me what's going on." She replied, "I don't know. And if I did, I would have told you by now so we could get the hell out of here." She paused, and then continued, "I'm sorry, I'm just really confused." And so was I, but I needed information, so I said, "Can you tell me what you know? Even if it's just minor details." She replied with a sad expression. Okay, here's what I know. I live in Phoenix, Arizona and was having dinner with my roommates when the lights went out. We thought nothing of it and went to bed. When I woke up, I was just here, alone. And then sometime later, that wall in front of us somehow morphed into a doorway. 2, maybe 7 feet tall, white figures came through the doorway dragging that man's body into this room. I couldn't see them well because my vision was very blurry, so I didn't get a good look at them. But what I did notice was something that you don't need eyes for. I heard that man screaming in terror, like he was being burned alive, only he wasn't. He was looking up at those things in horror. One of them lunged its so-called hand, if that's what you could call it, into the man's throat. The man began to choke and make the most gut-wrenching noises I have ever heard a human make. The man was suffocating and suffering. He dropped to the floor after a few moments. He was dead. The other thing in the room began to make noises that almost sounded like displacement. It seemed angry at what the other one had just done. They tossed the man's now deceased body into the room, and he's been there since. I later passed out in exhaustion, and woke up to you lying next to me, chained up in the way I am. And now we're here. I was shocked at the words she spoke. I didn't want to believe it. I was terrified, praying to a God that I didn't believe in to take me out of this hellish nightmare. Just as the woman was about to speak again, the wall in front of us began to shake, exposing a doorway that was not there before. Sure enough, 2 tall white figures stood at the doorway, only this time I could clearly see their distinct, horrid features. They both indeed stood around 7 feet tall and were purely white. They were naked, wearing no clothes, but they had no reproductive organs that I could see. They were in the shape of a human but had no fingers or toes. Their skin was smooth with no hair, bumps, or grooves. And what stood out the most was that they had no eyes or nose. They indeed had a mouth though, which one of them began to speak with. Its words were incomprehensible, spewing out noises that made no sense and had no pattern. Its voice was raspy and had a deep tone to it. It began to attempt its speaking again, only this time I could almost make out what it was trying to say. Let's play. I didn't know what it meant by this, but I didn't have to because after it said this, its face began to form 2 eyes. As soon as I looked into its newly formed red eyes, I began to feel nauseous and fell back, leaning onto the wall behind me. I passed out cold. I woke up in a different room, only this time it was much larger than the previous one I'd remembered, and it was made from a lightly colored material. I was sitting in a comfortable cushioned chair with a small table post directly in front of me. Further in front was one of these things from before, dressed in some kind of black clothes and was holding something. I couldn't tell exactly what it was, but it resembled some kind of small, dark stick with a large foam ball attached to the top of it. Behind it was maybe 10 rows of bleacher seats that sat more of these things which were all dressed in what I could only assume to be fancy alien-like attire. I looked to my left and noticed 3 more people sat in the same chair, with the same table. And to my right, the woman I had met merely moments earlier. All 5 of us were chained down to these chairs, so that none of us could escape. The being in front of all of us began speaking to the group of its kind. The lights got dim as it spoke. I couldn't understand a single thing it was saying, and I could tell based on my fellow humans' expressions, neither could they. The thing in front of us, which I will now refer to as an alien, turned to face us. We all squirmed in fear, anticipating its next actions. One of the humans seated at the far left of me spoke out. "Who are you people? Let me go. I'm a rich and powerful man. I can sue you. I've got good lawyers that see a dash." Just before the man could finish his sentence, the alien pointed at him. The whole room went dark, except for a dim, red spotlight aimed directly at the man. The man said, "What's happening?" He began to scream, which slowly built up more and more in volume until I needed to plug my ears from how loud he was belting out. I noticed that the aliens in the back of the room pulled out what I could only assume to be clear umbrellas, as if they were in the splash zone at SeaWorld or something. And then, something happened that I can never unsee and will be engraved into my brain for as long as I live. The man's head exploded into hundreds of pieces, spewing blood and brains all over his section of the room. A girl that was to the right of him screamed in horror as she was now covered in his remains. I couldn't believe what I saw. The alien in the front bowed to its audience, which made them erupt into clapping and cheering. The lights turned back on and the alien, which I now knew to be a host, began speaking into the thing it was holding. I also learned now that it must have been a microphone that he was holding. The alien host began speaking its foreign language again, gesturing towards us. Then suddenly, a transparent hologram screen appeared in front of all our tables. It read, "Galactic Odyssey Company" in perfect English. I noticed that the man directly to my left had a similar screen, although his words were in what I could only assume to be Japanese. From this, I learned that these aliens tailored our screens to our own native languages. The alien audience began to clap for a few seconds until their host began to speak again. After it said a few words, all our screens changed and showed us a question with 3 answers below it, and above the question was a timer that was counting down from 30 seconds. I quickly understood what was happening here. We were on some kind of alien game show and had to answer questions or they'd kill us, like they just killed that other guy for not cooperating. I turned to my right and already noticed that the woman was reading her question. The host made a growl at me for this, and I quickly turned my head towards it. It shook its head side to side, and so I looked back at my screen. The question read, "How many planets are in your local solar star system?" A. 3b, 9c, 8. I wasn't actually sure what the answer was. I wasn't a science geek, so how would I know? I knew that it couldn't be option A because there were definitely more planets than 3. I began to count in my head: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Wait, was Pluto a planet? Was the answer 9? I looked up to find that I only had 10 seconds left. I noticed to my right that the woman had already pressed one of the answers, although I couldn't tell which one. I think these aliens set up the screens in such a way that we couldn't cheat. 5 seconds left. 3, 2, I pressed option C out of a sheer guess. I wasn't sure of the correct answer. Once the timer hit 0, an ear-purling noise filled the room. The question disappeared, and my screen lit up green. Did I get it right? I turned to my right and noticed that the woman's screen was also the same color as mine. I turned to my left, and the man beside me had a screen filled with red. He must have got the answer wrong. The audience of aliens began to laugh at the man uncontrollably. The man looked up at the host and began pleading in a language that I did not understand. The lights went dark, and the man sitting next to me was only illuminated by a dim, red light. He began to scream in a way like the previous man, and I covered my face with my hands, knowing now what was to come. He gave one last screech when I heard it. The sound of a human head being blown to bits. I was covered in his blood, but not as much as I was expecting. The girl that was to the left of that man had a green screen like mine, so she got the answer correct as well. The next thing that happened was the host speaking again, talking to the audience. It turned to us as well and began clapping at us for passing the first round. It murmured in a barely understandable voice, saying, "Kondak Grat, Ula, Tyans." After he said this, the audience began clapping. They all stopped after our next question appeared in front of us on our screens. At this point, there were only 3 of us left, and I had to answer all the questions correctly to survive. I gulped and read the next question. Which element is commonly used as fuel for warp drives in interstellar travel? A. Dilithium. B. Unobtainium. C. Trilithium. What the hell? How was I or any of us supposed to know the answer to this? For all I knew, warp drives weren't even real. Or were they? Did I really have to make another guess? With mere seconds left, I made a complete and utter guess. I chose option C once again. After I selected it, my heart sank once the red light from my screen illuminated my face. I honestly didn't feel scared or worried, I felt confused and in denial. This had to be a dream, I couldn't have gotten the question wrong. I can't die, there's so much that I still wanted to do. I turned to my right and noticed that the woman had a green screen. She had gotten the answer right. I was happy for her. I didn't know her, but I wished the best for her and hoped that she could escape and get the story out there of what had happened to us all tonight. But then, I turned to my left and noticed that the other remaining girl had a red screen, just like mine. What did this mean? Do we both die now? The host then began to speak as the audience awed at his words. Then, 2 buttons showed up on both mine and the girl's screens, 1 red button and 1 green button. I didn't know what it meant, but I soon realized that it was a speed test as there was a 5-second timer above the 2 buttons. I looked at the girl, and she looked at me. I turned as quickly as I could and raised my right hand to press the green button as the girl did the same. As soon as I pressed it, the room went dark, only illuminating the girl with the same dim, red light as before. The girl turned to me and began cursing me. She screamed, "You damn cheater. He cheated. Please, give me one more chance. PLE-." She stopped talking and began screaming a horrid scream. And then, pop, just like the others. Once again, the alien crowd began cheering, but I couldn't help but feel guilty. I felt that I had just murdered that poor girl. I know it wasn't my fault, but I still pressed that button. 2 of us remained. The next question appeared, only this time, it was a short answer question. The question read, "What is your biggest regret?" I'll admit, I wasn't expecting a written response question, nor the question itself. Then again, I also wasn't expecting to get kidnapped by aliens tonight. I looked more at my screen and noticed that we both seemed to get extra time for this question, with the timer now reading 2 minutes. I'm glad we received extra time because I really couldn't think of an answer. I thought as hard as I could, but I froze up. I looked up and saw that a minute had already expired. I was beginning to panic until I remembered my parents. I remembered how life used to be. We used to see each other every week. We would talk about our days, grill some food, play board games. I remembered how I felt during those days. I remembered that I used to be happy. I wished that I had spent more time with them before everything went downhill. That was my biggest regret. I was about to type my response until I realized that there was no need to. The screen somehow knew exactly what I wanted to say. The time expired and I anticipated the response, except this time there was no red or green color. The host began speaking to the audience and the finely dressed aliens suddenly had their own translucent screens in front of them with only 2 symbols on them that I did not understand. Although I did understand what it meant, this was a vote, and the audience was our judges. My heart was racing like I was running a marathon. They were the ones who would decide our fate. The aliens in attendance began pressing one of the symbols almost all at the same time, with a few still taking a few extra moments to decide. Ultimately, once they all made their selections, there was a brief pause, and the room went silent. Until my screen had flashed green and the woman's screen had turned red. My heart began to settle down because they chose me. The woman began to tussle with her chains in an attempt to release herself, but there was no escape. The host turned towards me and with a wave of its arm, my chains were undone. I was free, but I did not run. I wasn't sure what to do, so I stood up. The host raised one of its arms, morphing the microphone it had been holding into something. The thing it had created resembled a gun, albeit nothing like the weapons that we humans have ever created. It handed me this gun and gestured towards the woman. I immediately understood what it was wanting me to do. The entire crowd of aliens stood up from their seats in anticipation. Time seemed to slow down as the woman to my right, a stranger, turned to me and said, "Please, don't do it. I beg of you, please. Don't do it." She had tears pouring from her eyes which were bloodshot red. She kept pleading with me, begging me not to do it, and I didn't blame her. I didn't want to shoot her, but I did want to survive. I wanted to live, so very badly. I would do whatever it took to get out of this goddamn place. And so, I said the woman, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I squeezed my finger and pulled the trigger. The bullet had viciously pierced right through the front of the poor woman's skull and out the other side at a high speed. Her lifeless body dropped to the floor, and as did mine. I dropped to my knees, crying for what I had just done. The audience began cheering the loudest they ever had tonight. They began throwing black roses towards my direction as a triumphant song began playing. The host crookedly walked over to me and attempted to speak my language once more, saying, "Yo, you! W-N." The crowd continued its roar of applause and amusement, and I continued my cries of guilt, but I couldn't help but feel happy that I won this horrible game. The host looked towards me, and I noticed that his face conjured the same red eyes that I saw from the other alien from before. I began to feel lightheaded and fell backwards as my vision faded to black. The last thing I heard was the unforgettable cheers from my audience. I woke up and found myself in a field, which I later found out was about 15 miles away from my house. It was still dark outside and only the moon and stars illuminated the field. I heard the soft roar of an engine from above and looked up to see a massive, dark sphere rotating about a mile above from where I was. It stood stationary there for a moment, and then soared off into the sky and out of the atmosphere, never to be seen again. The aliens must have dropped me off here and let me go as my reward for winning their disgusting game. However, I couldn't believe that I was actually back on the ground. I felt so grateful to be alive, until my memory hit. I had killed someone, and I had to remember that, and live with all the events that had transpired that night for the rest of my own morbid life. I couldn't help myself and threw up in the field. I wanted more than anything to wish this whole experience away, but I knew that it wouldn't. I began my walk back to my town, and back home. I'm still processing everything that happened that night and am not sure what to do with this information. I hope that none of you have to go through this, and I hope that the aliens do not choose you for their next game. Does anyone know anything about mimicking voices? I'm hoping this won't be too long, but I also hope you'll bear with me and offer any assistance that you have to offer. I have nowhere else to turn to, so this is my last option. A little preface I should tell you before I get into it. As a musician and producer, I have spent a long time tuning my ears into different methods of hearing. Ways of hearing nuances in sound, for how something sits in a mix, or combining noises in sound design. Give me enough time, or if I have the capacity to use enough of my brain power, I can hear details in sound to notice repeating samples or the differences in reverb and sound sources. Boring and pointless information to most, I am well aware. But it is because of this I know what I heard. I know what I heard, and I still cannot explain it. I understand that this place has some experiences with happenings like this, so if any of you have any explanations that might assist me in achieving comforted sleep once more, please do tell. Words cannot describe how much you would be doing, if not only to my peace of mind, perhaps for my family too. It was the evening of my sister's birthday, and her mom had to go out. Unbeknownst to my sister, she had pulled me aside moments ago to tell me that she was going to head over to her grandmother's, who had supposedly spent the day making a cake. The plan was for her to go and return with my grandmother as well as a cake, keeping it as a small surprise for my sister. My mom had already briefed me on this a week ago when she made the phone call to my grandmother to make sure she would be available, but still she felt the need to remind me. Maybe she just wanted to emphasize her incredible planning skills, or maybe she accurately thought I would have forgotten. Regardless, I was disinterested either way. Because of this, when my mom and I appeared from the kitchen, she told my sister she had a work emergency and had to go out quickly. She left us with a hug and instructions to make the pizza that had been left in the fridge if we got hungry before she got back. As soon as the door had closed, my sister had run off towards the living room to place herself in front of the TV. I followed her in there and sat down next to her, scrolling aimlessly on my phone. Though the TV was unable to hold her attention for long, and after roughly 20 minutes trying to tune out her irritating, nonsensical programming, she suddenly grabbed my hand and dragged me upstairs to her room. "I want to show you something cool," she was giggling as we rounded the corner to her room. She sat me down on the floor and produced her school bag from her bed, beginning to produce numerous birthday cards that she lay out on the floor waiting to show me. She picked one up and handed it to me, grinning mischievously as she told me to open it. But before I could, my phone started to buzz in my pocket. I pulled it out to see my mom's face flashing on the screen as it waited impatiently for me to pick up the call. I stood up and gave Alice a quick push on the head as I walked around the corner to my room to answer the call. "Hey Mom, what's up?" Will, can you hear me?" "Yeah, I can hear you. Are you alright?" Will I? I need you to listen to me. Her voice was shaking. It sounded like she had been crying, but I couldn't tell. Yeah, what's happened? Are you okay? What's happened? Will, I need you to grab Alice and get out of the house right now, okay? Mom, I don't understand. What's going on? I was trying to keep a calm head, but my heartbeat had shot from 0 to 60 at record speeds. I could feel my pulse in my ears, and I kept swallowing uncontrollably as I tried to process, or even just understand what my mom was saying. Please, can you just grab Alice? And she went quiet for a second. Is the back door still open? I think so, yeah. I pulled my door open around the corner back into Alice's room. Just please, grab Alice and get out. I pulled the phone away from my ear for a second and told Alice to grab her stuff. I was met with a familiar why from her. We need to, it's a birthday surprise. She piled her birthday cards back into her bag and excitedly stood up. I took her hand, squeezing it tightly in my own shaky hand, my phone still connected to my mom in the other. As we got to the top of the stairs, I stopped. I could have sworn I heard something. Where are we going? Alice started up, before I let go of her hand and clamped it down over her mouth. I tried to monitor a playful shush action, but I don't know how convincing it was. In the silence of the house, a slight, muffled creak sang out from downstairs, followed by the faint but definite sound of something soft and heavy shifting. Mom, are you downstairs? I whispered into the phone, my hand still hovering over Alice's mouth, though lucky for me she didn't seem to be interested in making a noise. I don't know whether she was playing along as part of the game, or because she had caught on to my shaky demeanor. Either way, I was thankful. I pushed my fingers down on the volume button before my mom had the opportunity to speak, leaving her at minimum volume as she said, "No. I can hear something moving downstairs." I breathed into the phone, not even sure if the phone would be able to pick it up. I have to conclude that it did, as I heard what I assumed was a response: bathroom. Now. Lock the door. I grabbed Alice's hand again and pulled her into the bathroom, closing the door as quietly as possible and gingerly turning the lock. The lights were off, but the light switch was outside, so it was too late to change that. Though even if we could have turned them on, I would not have, for fear of our location being too visible through cracks in the door or through the obscured glass of the window that faced out towards our backyard. Why are we locked in the bathroom? I had been staring into the abyss of the door before she spoke, looking down to see Alice tugging at my sleeve. We're, hiding, and if we're found, we're, shit, then we fail the game. You're not meant to say bad words. She glared up at me, as though trying to imitate me. I'm sorry, I'll pay you a $5 to make up for it. I'll pay you another $100 if you stay quiet, as so we can win the game. I couldn't seem to tell her the truth, but she didn't question it. Maybe I was trying to protect her from the fear that was gripping at my lungs, or maybe I just wanted her to obey without question. Still, that seemed to do the trick. She stepped back and dropped her school bag to the floor. She climbed into the bathtub and lay down, and I pulled the toilet seat down and sat, elbows on knees and eyes never leaving the door. Our only light was that which flooded in from the window behind me, plus a little yellowish blade of light that pushed its way under the locked door, tinting the color of the few little things that sat immediately in front of it. My heart was beating in my ears, but I forced it down as I focused all my attention on any noise that might come from the other side. My silent question was soon followed by the slow squeal of the top step of the stairs, diagonal from us. Did you hear that? I pointed at the door as I whispered the words. Alice shook her head. There was something slowly dragging over the carpeted floor outside the bathroom. Something large and heavy. It sounded like someone dragging a massive mattress over the lip of the stairs and across to where my bedroom was. Well, what do we win if we win th dash? My head whipped around to face Alice, glaring at her. She went silent and sunk back into the bathtub. I felt bad, but I couldn't apologize. My expression softened a little, and I lifted my finger to my lips in a silent shush motion. In the silent whisperings of the house, a voice called out from around the corner from the bathroom door. Hello? It couldn't be, but it was. The voice that called out from around the corner was that of our grandmother. Alice was already moving, sitting upright in the bathtub prepped and ready to call out, but she stopped herself and looked at me. I shook my head and turned back to face the door. "Can I help you?" The voice spoke again from the other side of the door. Alice couldn't help herself. In a quiet voice before I could stop voice she replied, "Nana?" Her call was immediately answered by the sound of the sliding. A loud fervous movement sliding desperately from around the corner and slamming up against the bathroom door. All of the soft yellow light seeping through the crack under the door was expunged, leaving us isolated with the lonesome shine of the moon as our illumination. The bathroom turned cold and dark, felt even less comforting and even more lonely. It spoke again, "Can I help you?" The only thing that could tear my attention away from the door was the dull aching pain that was from within my hand. I looked down to see my phone still held in my white-knuckled grip, trembling slightly. The screen was still lit, and it looked like the call was still open. I lifted it to my ear once again and shakily whispered into the phone, "Are you still there, Mom?" Yes, I'm still here, W. What's happening? Are you with Nana?" She went silent for a second. Yes, she's here." Her voice was trembling. "Alice and I are locked in the bathroom. There's someone outside that sounds like Nana. It's not her. Just stay there. Don't leave. I'm on my way back. Call the police right now, I'll be there soon. Don't fucking leave. Do you hear me?" "Yes, Mom. Don't leave, just stay there and I'll..." The phone went silent. I looked down at the little black screen. Nothing. Dead. "No, please God, no," I said loudly without thinking, before clamping my hand over my mouth and once again staring at the door. The phone screen flashed for a second with its dead battery image, a passive-aggressive request for charging. I was moments from tears, my head falling towards my hands and my back slouching forward, completely defeated. I could hear another sound of sliding against the bathroom door, combined with the slight creaking as it strained to sustain the weight that was pressed up against it on the other side. Before the silence of its ceasing could recover, the voice spoke again. "Can I help you?" "Will." Alice's tiny voice broke through the increasingly loud pulsing of my blood surging through my ears. She was looking at me worriedly. I stood up from the toilet seat and went over to sit next to her on the bath mat next to the tub. "Are you okay?" Her face was expressing a deep concern for me, an expression that was nearly never displayed by her. Yeah, I just spoke to Mom. She said she's on her way back. And if we can stay in here till she gets back, we win. Sound good? Do you promise?" "I do." She lay back down in the bathtub and proceeded to produce her birthday cards once again from within her school bag, like she had been in her bedroom. The door was still blocked from the other side, something resting against the other side of the door still blocking out the light. Whatever it was that had been moving, it was still waiting on the other side of the door, but for whatever reason it had not attempted to get the door open, and for that I was thankful. Though just as I tried to calm what little remained of my nerves, there was another sound. "Can I help you?" Another lingering silence before a quieter muttering plea, "No, please God, no." It was identical. My inflection, pitch, and tone. It was my voice. Not as a played recording or imitation. It was as clear as I spoke it, only muffled slightly from behind the door. My blood turned cold. "Was that you, Will?" Alice mumbled from inside the tub. I knew I would continue to lie to her about everything being all right, but her voice sounded unsure, and it was possible that she was starting to become afraid. I suppose there's only so long you can try and tell someone everything is fine while you cower on floor of your locked bathroom in pitch darkness. And no. What's going on? She was gripping her bag tightly to her chest for comfort, her eyes wide with anxiety. "It's just a game, it's a GA-dash. Don't lie to me." She stood up, glaring down at me, still sitting on the floor. Too loud. Once again there was a loud creak from the door followed by the words, "Don't lie to me." I never thought I could be so scared and disgusted by the sound of my own sister's voice. But there it was. The scraping on the door was growing louder and more desperate. The weight on the other side of the door lifted and then rammed into the door in a soft, wet, agonizing thud. It spoke again. "Please God." I help you, me, and then it slammed into the door again. Another thud. And another. I have had many scary occurrences or near-death experiences in my time on this planet. I have seen things I wish to erase from my memory and felt things I wish my brain would never have been able to register. And still I can say, never in my life have I felt such bone-gripping fear as I did in this moment. My legs were barely working, and nothing would move without shaking. My system was full of only adrenaline, and yet all I could think to do was lie down and give up. Nothing was as it should be as my mind raced with every thought in the world and hopelessly tried to purge itself of all of them. The only actions that were successfully translated from my brain to my body was to climb into the bathtub and wrap my arms around my sister, clutching her tightly as though my trembling feeble body would have been any defense against whatever was on the other side of the door, forcing itself against the door over and over again. With each collision, a terrifying jumble of words was called to us, in the comforting and fearful voices of my grandmother, sister, and myself. It seemed relentless, light flashing under the door with its movements before it bowed in the middle, a narrow beam of light shooting in from the doorframe as the door itself slowly began to cave under the repetitive pressure. The loud, rhythmic impacts had almost tuned out my hearing as they became cyclical to the point where the greatest shock came when they stopped short, the door still barring most of the space between the bathroom and the outside. Our voices called to us once more, "Please, help me." The words lingered in the air for a second, then what sounded like exposed flesh sliding gently against the door, though I didn't dare look. Then it screamed. The sound of my grandmother. The sound of my sister. The sound of my own voice screaming in joyful elation, screaming in abject terror, screaming in agonizing pain. Every emotion imaginable was forced into that scream, tormenting my ears before it was broken by another gut-wrenching fleshy thud against the door, splintering and caving in on itself, barely holding onto its hinges as it valiantly stood to protect us. The next impact that rang out through the house didn't come from that door, though. There was the impactful sound of the front door being broken in on its hinges, followed by the charging sounds of footsteps and the authoritative voices of police officers as they flooded into our house. I dared look towards the bathroom door, but other than a swift colorless motion at the corner of the door, I can't be sure I saw anything. Seconds later, the faces of 3 policemen appeared at the cracked bathroom door, calling out to us in reassurance. With shaking legs and pale white faces, Alice and I gingerly moved towards the door and wrenched the lock open, swinging the now bent door open and following the policeman down the stairs. I didn't mention it at the time, but I am more than certain that the back of the door and the floor of the hallway to down the stairs had what seemed to be a clear gelatinous fluid lightly coated over all of them. But the next time I would look days later, there would be no evidence as such. That night, my mom, Alice, and I all stayed at my dad's, and we stayed a few nights after. Even after my mom would move back to the house, Alice and I refused to go with her, though in time Alice would return home. I still refused to be there, and less than a year later we ended up moving house entirely. I didn't know at first, but would soon find out that my grandmother had died 2 days before Alice's birthday, though no one knew till my mother got to her house. She would find her on her living room floor missing her tongue and larynx. My family don't celebrate birthdays anymore, and we don't talk about it. But I have spent so many nights thinking about it. From every angle, every possibility, everything, but I have absolutely no theories as to what happened that night or how. I still sleep lightly years later, and wake to any sound no matter how quiet. My brain is always ready, and never trusting of any voices I hear. Faces are real. Don't trust what you hear.